For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should ministers pick out their own civil servants? To debate this, I'm joined by Stephen Pound, former Labour MP, Martin Daubeny, GB News contributor, Peter Edwards, former editor of the Labour List, and also Suzanne Evans. Right, well, I'm going to start with my newbie, Peter Edwards. Not you, actually, not Peter Edwards. I saw I couldn't work out what your name is again. Who are you?
Stephen Pound.
Stephen Pound.
I used to be.
Yeah, I'm joking. Stephen, what do you think? Should they be allowed to pick their own civil servants?
Absolutely not. It's bonkers. One of the few things we can actually be proud of in what Peter Hennessy talks about, the marriage of government, is to actually have an impartial expert civil service. Look, ministers do choose their own special advisors at the present time. There are people who are both civil servants and political appointees, SPAD, special advisors. So you've got them already. Now, imagine if we had a politically appointed civil service. Do you know there are 500,000 civil servants in this country at the present time? So at what level do you start? What level do you stop? And what happens when the government changes? Do they all get the sack? What sort of a person would take a job in the heart of government knowing that it's only a temporary job? No, I'm sorry to say that New Zealand and Australia are the exemplars of here. When you just actually look at France, where they have the cabinet system, look at America, where all the senior members are appointed on political grounds. Neither of them, I would suggest, is an excellent example for us in this country.
Well, let's go to Suzanne Evans, political commentator. Susan.
So I think what Stephen is saying would be absolutely fine were it the case that the civil service was the civil service of old, where they were genuinely impartial. But I think what we've seen, particularly with the Dominic Raab incident now, but before that also with Priti Patel, who you remember was also the subject of bullying allegations by civil servants who apparently seem to be very pro the European Union and very anti her views on immigration. So again, I think we've got a very different situation now. In an ideal world, yes, the civil service would be impartial, but I'm afraid I've met civil servants, I'm sure Stephen has as well, let's be honest, you must have done, Stephen, who are not impartial. They clearly aren't. And this is a problem that seems to be getting worse and worse. People I speak to in the civil service who are not part of the normal left-wing groupthink are finding it increasingly difficult to do their job. And they're seeing how the civil service is using their power to undermine and subordinate members of parliament and indeed government ministers. And I think if we've got a situation where civil servants are very important people in government. Remember, there are something like 3,500 laws that are passed under the radar without any kind of scrutiny from either the houses of either houses of parliament, statutory instruments, and civil servants just pushing these through. And we're losing a heck of a lot of scrutiny.
Well, let me get Peter Edwards on that one. What do you think, Peter?
There's no case for having political appointees of this nature. Steve Pound put it brilliantly, and one of the examples he quoted was America, where there's more and more gridlock in the legislatures. There's no case for it at all. And as Steve alluded to, there's already special advisors known as SPADs. So in the last 30 years, from Blair to Cameron to now, the number of those has increased, the salaries have increased. Some SPADs who work directly for the Secretary of State are paid more than 100 grand in some cases. So there's already a politicised class of official who have loyalty to their boss, and in 99% of cases to the party as well. There's just no case for this. And the virtue of the British Constitution, and Steve prayed in aid Lord Hennessy of Nymphsfield, is independence, is expertise. And of course, it gets it wrong some of the time, just like we do in all professions.
Well, let's get Martin on. Martin.
Well, I think we don't want to go from a situation of yes minister to yes men or yes women. So surround yourselves by people who fawn to you and agree with all you say and tug their forelocks. That's also bad. Why not go for a sort of jury-type system? If we can appoint a balanced jury to decide on individual cases, why not appoint a balanced civil service in the high offices of the land? You only have to look at the kind of list of scalps that have been claimed by the blob, Priti Patel, Dominic Raab, Boris Johnson, Partygate, and front page of the Express today. Look, they're going for Suella Braverman next. They're fearing that they are politically motivated in their attacks and their targets, specifically along lines of policies they don't agree with: Brexit, immigration, deportation. With that in mind, why not have a kind of vetting process as you would in any ordinary business? So you have due impartiality. We clearly do not at the moment. And Dominic Raab took a swipe at the senior civil servants, not the juniors, the seniors who've been around since the days of Blair, Are they doing Blair's dirty work for the Labour Party still to this day? As long as that whiff of suspicion is around, I think the public have a right to ask and demand for some political impartiality.
Well, what about though? Because of, okay, so what about Mark Sawatzka? Now he's the head of the PCS union. He specifically said, which is a civil servants union, he specifically said that he wanted to bring the government down. The problem with not having civil servants who are kind of on your side is that if they decide to try and bring you down because they are mostly from the opposing party, then we have a problem, Stephen. I mean,
you can't judge the whole of the civil service by Mark Sawatzka, but look.
Yeah, but he's the head of the union of them. I mean, that's a big.
I know, but he doesn't have a switch on people's brains to say that they should actually fall in line with him. I mean, Mark Sawatzka is appointed by a very, very small percentage of people. But look, when I was an MP, I had a staff of about 3 or 4 people, and obviously I'd prefer them to be sympathetic to my political party, my views, but I didn't actually appoint them on that basis, and I think a lot of what we got here is just bad management. I had people in my office who were not Labour supporters, but they were damn good at their job, and I think if you manage those staff properly, then you're doing the job properly. But as for politicisation, it is not politicising to actually call out incompetence, and where you see incompetence in the civil service, you know, the Rwanda plan, a lot of the nonsense that's going on at the moment, that is not incompetence, that is doing your job properly. As far as I'm concerned, Dominic Raab was a bad manager.
Yes, but Stephen, when Dominic Raab called out incompetence in the civil service over deploying Spanish troops on the Gibraltar mainland, he was called a bully and removed from his post.
So how did he do it? That's the point.
Well, he was abrasive.
Yeah. Suzanne.
Yeah, I mean, I was hearing a story just a couple of weeks ago from someone who works in the civil service. They had someone in their office who wasn't performing. Well, they weren't doing their job. She made a complaint. HR got involved. Everybody agreed with her. But this person was just shoved on sideways. It is actually very difficult with current employment legislation to get rid of people who are not good and not performing. And the civil service is no different. And I think what Martin said is brilliant. We've got to have some kind of selection procedure for civil servants. They need to be tested. You know, at the moment, if they overstep the mark, I mean, I think of someone like the former head of the civil service, Gus O'Donnell, who after the Brexit vote said, oh, it doesn't matter, leaving the EU's not inevitable. Well, sorry, Gus, it isn't, it wasn't, it should have been. You know, just being called before a select committee and basically being able to turn your nose up to it is not good enough scrutiny, is not good enough accountability. The civil servants, at the very least, needs.
Oh, she's gone. Peter.
Well, that's one way of closing down the debate.
What did you say?
No, I thought Martin, I'm about to fall off my chair. I thought Martin was living in a parallel reality. Yeah. In any other walk of life, you don't ask people their political views when they've applied for a job.
It's illegal.
And you're not allowed to.
This is politics.
And the idea that you have pre-appointment hearings like in the US, well, if we already complain about the civil service being too slow at times, like in COVID, that will slow things down even more. Finally, there is no evidence at all that the complainants in the Raab case had anything to do with an anti-Brexit conspiracy. Brexit has happened, a hard Brexit has happened. Dominic Raab broke the rules and he resigned before he was sacked.
All right, well, let's see what your thoughts are then. I'm going to ask each of you, should the civil service be partial or impartial? Should it be impartial? Impartial. What do you think?
It should be impartial, and I think we need balance, and we should, as I said, have a selection process, not to weight it in one party's favour, but to ascertain balance. So therefore, decisions can be judged in balance and not in bias.
So should they be allowed to pick their own civil servants? Yes or no?
I think both major parties, should be involved in the selection process, and no, they shouldn't be allowed to choose their own people. But there should be a selection process to ensure neutrality.
That's a no. Should they be allowed to pick their own people? Yes or no?
Absolutely not.
No, and Peter.
Absolutely not, and I'm delighted that there's a right of redress for civil servants who've been wronged by their political masters.